All right, part 3, chapter 26. Destruction in their wake is what we're calling this chapter. So, in order to help minorities, many liberals and progressives decided that the way to do that, while they're enslaving them through dependency on one hand, behind the mask, but the mask when it's on is helping minorities by helping them link and reestablish and grow their own personal cultures from the different places on Earth that they might have, on the planet they might have come from, and their own personal identities. This is identity politics. So the blacks need their own culture. They need a separate segregationist type culture, a black culture. Hispanics need a culture. They need to be able to speak Spanish whenever and however, even though this is an English-speaking country. They need to, and on and on and on. But it's not just about, they're not necessarily raising these people up. They're not necessarily educating them anymore. They're not necessarily giving them, all the opportunities equal with Americans, because they don't believe that. They believe in equal result, not equal opportunity. So in order to pull off the scam on these people that they have to destroy what they are perceiving to be in the way of their plan. So what would be in the way of helping a black culture get more strong and self-identified, or a Hispanic culture, or what have you? And that would be the American culture is in the way. And why? Because the Democrats don't understand the 14th Amendment. What? Yeah, that's what I said. They don't understand the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was an amendment that not only gave blacks citizenship, but it defined what an American citizen is. And in that, the idea was that an American citizen, wherever they came from, they weren't born here, even the ones that want to be citizens, had to do certain things to become a citizen. They had to give fealty to the United States. For those of you in Democrat-run public schools, that means loyalty. They had to assimilate into our culture. Big, important part of that. And they had to know American history and values and become part of the American, understand American dream and Americanism. All things American. The second one about the assimilation was a no-brainer for 200 years. And then all of a sudden, assimilation's a bad thing. Now all of a sudden, they are segregating from American culture. They're putting down any American thing that's American culture. They're even denying there is a unique American culture. All for the express purpose of helping minorities with their culture. So you destroy American culture to do this good deed of helping minorities. They also wanted to help improve health care. So, in the typical fashion of Democrat radical overreach, there was a few things that were wrong with health care. Just a few things. They might have not been small things, they might have been big things, but there were just a few things. What were they? There was no portability, job to job. You couldn't get competing bids or competing insurance from other states from the one you lived in. You didn't have the ability to deal with pre-existing conditions. You wouldn't get insurance for that. And the costs of insurance were skyrocketing. Well, the cost of insurance skyrocketing is a different discussion, and there's reasons that happened, and they're not Republican in their nature as far as why they happened. But most of the rest of it, easy to fix. Hell, they could have just passed the law, said, okay, insurance companies, from now on you're going to do this, this, and this. Problem solved. Oh, but no. Those reasons were just the spark, the ignition, the accelerant needed for this explosion in healthcare coverage. That was just the excuse given. Because the goal, going back 100 years in the progressive movement, was universal, government paid for, taxpayer paid for, healthcare for everyone. The socialist, utopianist ideal of healthcare. Forget who's going to pay for it, because then liberals can never answer that question. I don't care what the subject is. They just ignore that question every single time. How are you going to pay for it? In order to facilitate getting to national health care, along came the slippery slope, somewhat large leap step towards universal health care, nationalized health care, socialist health care, known as Obamacare. The great overreach, which, if you remember, no Republican voted for that piece of crap, and rightly so, but they never took it to a vote. They just deemed it passed one Saturday evening or whatever it was, and voila, we have Obamacare. What was it promised to do? It promised to lower payments. Instead, they went up. Hundreds of percentages in some cases, some states. It promised that you could keep your doctor. That was a lie. You could keep your plan if you liked it. That was a lie. That it would increase the amount of people on on insurance doles. That there were more people would be insured. That was a lie. They say to this day that people who still want to save Obamacare, that there are more people insured today. I said, no. You don't get to say that with a straight face. Well, maybe you do, because the mask is on. How many people got out of insurance plans? How many people paid the fee this big to avoid paying this much? Young people who were forced to pay catastrophic insurance premiums when they're 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old. What dumbass is going to do that? They have a long life in front of them. They don't need catastrophic insurance. Forced right down. Mandated by the government at penalty of fee. And then, of course, the fee got bigger, and down the road it was going to be under the IRS's jurisdiction to penalize and imprison people for not covering themselves with health care. What kind of big brother tyrannical crap was that? And the Supreme Court balked at their responsibility, unconstitutionally said, no problem. Although many lawyers knocked down judges knocked down many aspects of it, it was just ignored by Obama. He didn't give a damn. They lost as many people as they gained by virtue of paying fees or ignoring it altogether. And of course, because it was expensive as crap, it further ruined the economy. Again, Obama doubled the debt. He increased the debt by more amount than all the presidents prior to him combined. And if you want to pretend that the debt is not a problem, you're an idiot. It's a big problem. They also wanted to improve the environment. Oh yes, the tree huggers, here they come. Well, everyone wants to improve the environment. It's about implementation. Conservatives wish to conserve the environment too. It's a matter of degree, and it's a matter of how. But everything that the Democrats propose is expensive and unnecessary. You've got like the Paris Accords, which Trump backed us out of, thankfully. It accomplished virtually 2% of all the things it was supposed to accomplish. And we spent billions of dollars on this thing right down the toilet for nothing. If you're going to do something that costs a lot of money, shouldn't you at least get something for your money? Democrats don't care. It's the right thing to do. Really? Pissing away a bunch of money that could go to help other people? That's the right thing to do? They want to help blacks. Now I'm getting specific about minorities, but they want to help blacks. Mask on, because they've never wanted to help blacks, and they still don't. But they ended up, like as I mentioned, enslaving them through dependency. Remember, the whole idea here was they couldn't keep them on the plantation as slaves. And then they couldn't keep them from being citizens. And then the Democrats couldn't keep them from voting. And then the Democrats couldn't keep them from being separate but equal, Plessy versus Ferguson, where they are out of their face all the time, segregated. And then they couldn't keep them from having civil rights, which they tried mightily to do. There was only one last thing, and that is to keep them from gaining power, wealth, status, and make them thank you for it by making them dependent on the government. All you have to do is vote Democrat to ensure that those wascally Republicans don't make you have to pay and go to work. Pay for your own stuff and go to work. And keep that welfare check coming and those food stamps. Just vote Democrat. Dependent on the government, dependency on the government, a new type of slavery. They're just as enslaved today as they've ever been. A whole swath of black folks. Way to help the blacks. Good job, Democrats. They wanted to fight for free speech, which is interesting since there wasn't a whole lot of suppression of free speech until they decided to help. The free speech movement, 1964, Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. Started out as a Republican and Democrat cooperative thing. People on the right and left. In very short order, it morphed into a radicalized left-wing propaganda machine that slowly also morphed into the infancy of political correctness on college campuses, which we now deal with everywhere, which limits free speech because now you can't say certain things because of political correctness. So they try to improve free speech, although the Constitution pretty much had it figured out already. And because of their little tinkering and their need for change, even when things aren't broken, fixing what ain't broke, now we have less free speech, at least in their eyes. They're trying to enforce less free speech by controlling what we say. And so many Americans today are sheeple, whatever, are kowtowed by this. They're afraid to say certain things in certain situations. It's really ridiculous. As I said in the previous video, there was a time when people didn't care. They would judge, and they would say it out loud, and they would shame people, and go like this, and shake their head, and say, this is not acceptable, to your face. Don't see that much anymore. PC completely stifles free speech. It leads to boycotts. It boycotts ideas as well as things. And it affects, limiting free speech limits creativity. There again, lack of creativity, lack of capitalism, lack of, it suppresses what they don't like. They want to live in this bubble, this world of their own creation, this utopia, where everyone gets along Everyone says the right thing, and that's not human nature, as we discussed before. They wanted to fight for women's rights. Okay, let's talk about that. 40 years prior to the women's right to vote in the early 1920s, 40 years, the Republican Party tried to give the women the vote. They put bill after bill after bill after bill after bill into Congress, only to be shut down by the Democrats, the progressives. Now, the liberals love taking credit for stuff, and unfortunately they can't on this one. Even Woodrow Wilson fought against women's rights movement, suffragette movement, until his last months in office, when he signed on to the idea, but it wasn't up for vote, so he actually didn't have anything to do with it. But the sweep of Republicans that came in following the end of his presidency and Warren Harding's administration swept in enough Republicans where they could finally pass the 18th Amendment? I don't know, whatever it is, for women's getting the vote. Republicans did that. Today, or move forward, I guess, 40 years, and you're in the 1960s and the beginnings of the feminist movement. Betty Friedan, some other nut jobs we've talked about, Gloria Steinem, bunch of hypocrites, bunch of morons. Yeah, but there was a little sliver of the feminist movement, the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, that was trying to be pushed through. What basically said, in its core, the women's right movement of the 60s and 70s, in its core, was that women should get paid equal as a man for equal work. And they should have the same benefits, the same rights, the same whatever. Nothing which a Republican, or conservative anyway, in their right mind should be against. And there might have been some Republicans back then, the Blue Dogs back then, before they had, we found our way again, that were resistant to that. The good old boy networks and all that, the glass ceiling and all that. It may have existed, but nature and human nature and evolution of culture would have solved that problem in no time. But what happened instead? The liberals got a hold of the Equal Rights Amendment. The liberals were in charge of the feminist movement. The liberals were in charge of the women's rights movement. And they took it over and they destroyed it. It then became a pro-abortion movement. It became a special rights instead of equal rights movement. It became, it turned feminist groups into hate groups. Or as Rush Limbaugh affectionately calls them, feminazis, because they became almost militant, anti-male. Now they try to confuse the sexes in their fight for women's rights or whatnot. Whereas sexism and misogyny are now confusing and adding sexes other than male and female. And all this other stuff that just, it's so far into the stratosphere, none of it makes any damn sense anymore. But now, who wants to be part of this unless you are an absolute nut radical? So much for the women's movement. It happened anyway, despite their move. Nothing they did caused women to get better pay and become CEOs of corporations and shatter the glass ceiling, which they basically have done. It happened to spite them. And now, instead, they've destroyed not only the women's movement itself, but have caused all sorts of mayhem between the sexes. Thanks. We'll have more on the next part.